Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today as we commemorate National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. The intern class of 2021 has put together a great presentation tonight that focuses on the misconceptions of human trafficking and internet safety as technology has become more prevalent in all our lives due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The theme of tonight's presentation is modeled after a recently popular game, Among Us, in which there is a hidden imposter that tries and kills all the other players before their identity gets revealed. The goal we are hoping to leave you with tonight is a visual representation of just how easy it is to connect with someone online and to make sure you always know who is among you. The plan for tonight is to start with a video in which you guys will see how the game Among Us is played. I advise you to pay attention to the conversation between the pink and yellow characters. And although there will be moments of silence within the game in this presentation, there is still so much that can still be happening. From here, we will share some insight on online grooming, which will be highlighted more in the second Discord videos. Debunking myths and red flags will then be discussed, leading into some tips on how to be an active bystander. Finally, we will end tonight's event with a speaker panel. Before we dive right in, the intern class does want to acknowledge that the information we are about to present does not conclude the entirety of human trafficking, but has been more so generalized to the information we wanted to get across the most. The demographic we are focusing on is mostly children and adolescents, and if there's any specific questions after the event is done, there will be a post-attendance Google form survey in which you can ask your questions there. And now let's begin. Here's our first video.
So here we begin to see some of the terminology used in the game. GG stating good game. ASL, which is age, sex, and location. Things that the traffickers may want to start asking to start identifying what victim they're going to target. Here we could observe some of the mirroring language. So this is the main thing you want to keep an eye on during this gaming. again, here they're already more comfortable. They just won the game, so reinforcing that how good they played together, how well they did. So he's asking for the Discord, which is another platform where gamers meet offline to talk and chat.
So now we're going to go into some principles of online grooming. So first and foremost, grooming is when a predator builds an emotional relationship with a child or young adult to manipulate, exploit, or abuse them. So these are some common stages of online grooming. We have stage 1, which is the friendship and relationship forming stage. We have stage 2, which is the risk assessment stage. There's stage 3, which is the exclusivity stage. Stage 4, which is the desensitization or exploitative stage. And stage 5 is the conclusion stage. That was sort of an example of how the friendship and relationship forming stage might go. So in this stage, the predator gets introduced to the child and gathers information about them and oftentimes their family in order to actually gain their trust. They often also try to fulfill the child's or their family's needs. So language in this stage is asking for contact information on social media, on gaming platforms, just like Discord that we just saw. And they talk about hobbies, and they also often use soft compliments like sweetie or cutie. So one thing that you would have probably noticed in the video is the amount of mirroring language that was used by the predator. So mirroring language is literally mirroring a child's language by mimicking their emotions or their sentiments or even their hobbies in order to establish a sense of connection. So in the two examples that we see here, we can see a child saying that their mom doesn't like it when they play Fortnite, and the predator mirrors the same sentiment, saying that his or her mom doesn't either. And in the bottom right, the same sort of idea where the child is expressing that he loves a certain game and the predator mimics that sentiment. This is the risk assessment stage where the predator tries to gauge the level of threat that the parents or caregivers may pose. So language in this stage might be, are your parents around? Who else uses the computer? Can you delete your chats, etc.
So the next stage that we have is the exclusivity stage. And in this stage, predators try to gain the trust of the child completely by asserting that they have a special bond. If you have a child in your family or if you have a friend, things that predators will try to do is spend some alone time with them. So look out for trips to amusement parks, free tutoring sessions, and similar situations like these. Some common language in this stage are some strong compliments, such as "you are a sweetheart," "you are so cute when you look like that," and "I feel a deep connection with you I don't feel with anyone else."
The fourth stage in online grooming is the desensitization and exploitative stage. This stage can also be known as the sexual stage because the trafficker may talk about sexual activities in order to desensitize the child to that content. And the language that the predator may use in this stage can be very personal because they may ask questions such as, are you a virgin, giving sexually oriented compliments, asking for explicit pictures or videos, and even asking the child to be their boyfriend or girlfriend. And that's why it's important as parents and caregivers to communicate with your children about these things at an appropriate age so they know what to do if they ever find themselves in a situation like this. And the video that we see next will give us a preview of what may happen in the conclusion stage of online grooming.
So this is the conclusion stage. This is also referred to as the abusive stage. Some common tactics that are used during this stage to keep the child or young person's participation include secrecy, blame, or even threatening the person. An example of a threat that may be used by an online groomer includes threatening to share explicit pictures that the victim may have been coerced into sending by the predator. It's important to remain aware of a child's or young person's behavior and reactions to individuals surrounding them. If they appear fearful or withdrawn when going to see a particular person, they may have been conditioned to remain silent about potential abuse. So it's definitely important to check in with the young person and create a safe space for open dialogue. Some examples of dialogue that could occur between the predator and the child is, when we meet, I can't wait to hug and kiss you, and are you able to meet up with me alone, or do your parents always have to know everything? As you can see by looking at the examples, the predator is seeking to control the situation, and this dynamic is abusive.
In this section, we will be discussing debunking myths revolving around human trafficking. So the first myth is human trafficking involves moving, traveling, or transporting the person across state or national borders. But in reality, human trafficking does not always involve movement. Survivors have been recruited and trafficked in their home state, hometown, and even in their actual homes.
Another common myth is that only women and girls can be victims and survivors of sex trafficking, but in reality, a study estimates that nearly half of sex trafficking victims are men, and advocates suggest that the percentage may even be higher, but men are less likely to be identified. Boys and young men are in the LGBT plus community are seen as a particularly vulnerable group to sex trafficking.
A common myth is that human trafficking is an important problem, but it is fairly uncommon in New Jersey. In reality, New Jersey is a hotspot for human trafficking because of its unique transportation features like I-95 and major seaports.
One of the biggest myths about human trafficking is that the people who are being trafficked are physically unable to leave their situations, locked in, or held against their will. This may be true in some cases, however, more often this is not the case. In reality, there are several reasons why the victims of human trafficking don't leave the situation that they're in. These individuals may lack the basic necessities to physically leave the situation, such as not having transportation or having a safe place to live where they can escape to. On the other hand, they could have been manipulated to the extent where they lose control of their lives without ever noticing. At that stage, they might not identify with being under someone's control because they become dependent on the traffickers, so they stop trying to break away from that situation.
Our last myth is that the problem of human trafficking is simply too big. There is nothing I can do. The reality is that while the problem seems overwhelming, by uniting together through conversations and working with organizations like NJCAT and the Polaris Project, you could save a life. By simply being able to recognize the signs of a person being trafficked can change someone's life. Together, we can create a safer world.
So this section is going to revolve around red flags of human trafficking from different perspectives, including from a general perspective, a parent or guardian's perspective, as well as a child or young computer user's perspective. Since human trafficking happens all over the world, including the United States, it is really crucial for all parents, guardians, and young computer users to understand how to recognize some of these red flags that are especially being used by traffickers online today.
So although there are some additional signs for human trafficking, here's a helpful acronym, red flags. So the first one is being reluctant to speak. The victim may remain quiet when spoken to or may be fearful of speaking for themselves, and the trafficker may often speak for them. The next one is exhausted. An exhausted appearance can sometimes be an indication of trafficking. Being dominated or controlled, they may have no say of what goes on or may not have access to personal information or documents, like an ID or passport. And another example is not being allowed to leave a certain area. fearful, long work hours, which they may not be getting paid for or being paid very little, and working in dangerous conditions, being alienated from family and friends. Traffickers tend to do this intentionally to isolate their victims, and also this isolation makes it harder for the victim to reach out for help. Last, we have, or no, that's actually not the last one. Gifts from an older partner, which could be a phone or tablet. Traffickers often give these gifts to gain the young person's trust or to make an attempt to keep their conversations a secret from those who may be close to the victim. And also signs of abuse. This could be malnourishment, bruises or wounds, or even mental illnesses such as depression. So these signs are examples that could alert you to a potential trafficking situation that should be reported. But to reiterate, this is not a complete list of the signs of human trafficking, and each individual experience is different.
So in this slide, we're talking about the guardian's perspective, one that for me is very near and dear to my heart since I became a father about a year ago. So here we're going to be talking about these red flags to look for as a guardian. So anything like increased online activity, if you notice that your child is spending way too much time online and that's all they want to do lately, it may be a good idea to find out why they started being so engaged online versus if they weren't so much before. So that's probably good to know. Then we have the switching screens. If you're passing by and you happen to look over and into your child's phone, laptop, or gaming device, and they quickly switch screens, then just kind of take a mental note to that and see how often it happens. Could be a sign and a red flag for you to watch out. Next, we have secretive about visiting websites or who they're talking to. This one kind of goes hand in hand with the first one about not wanting the parent or the guardian to know what they're doing. For example, here we could easily talk about dating apps and something like an adolescent where they begin to use stuff like Bumble, Tinder, Grinder, OkCupid, and many more dating apps that there is nowadays. And this is a platform used a lot by traffickers because they're trying to make connections through these apps, and they definitely target individuals here. Next, let's talk about possessing new items. This is a very important one, since as a guardian, maybe you should be aware of what items your child has or where have they acquired certain items from that you haven't bought for them. So maybe, like an example, they show up with a new iPhone or new headphones or any tangible item that you haven't gotten them or you don't know who has, then that's a red flag. Maybe something good for you to do to kind of combat this is having that relationship with your child's friend's parents, just to keep that communication line open and to really know if, hey, my friend gave me this iPhone, they had an extra one, and you want to know if that's the reality of what's going down, because once you start finding out about these lies, then you really want to have that communication as to where they're getting these items from. Becoming emotional volatile. So maybe they start becoming over dramatic, having anger problems, more emotionally unstable than they ever were before. And then it could be possibly they're using this as a way to disconnect you from them and then go back to their online activities, or where they have that person where they think that they're connected to and that understands them. So they'll start relying more on their online friends or a potential trafficker than you. Using language that is not appropriate. If all of a sudden they start using terms, lingos that you haven't heard anybody use near them or you don't use around your house, then maybe start, inquiring where they learn these words, this language, or where is it coming from. Most of all, just to wrap up this slide, it's just very important to let your child know that they have an open communication and it's okay for them to come up to you if they ever need help or they need to vent about something. Just state that they can trust you no matter what, because at the end of the day, we're here for our children and for everybody else's.
So this portion will be touching on red flags from the user's perspective that parents can share with their children or that young computer. We previously showed examples of these throughout the video game, such as the predator asking for a lot of personal information, like in the game when the pink player was asking about where the yellow player goes to school and what activities they're involved in, and saying how they would love to come see them in a play or something, so on and so forth. It is also important to know it is a red flag if the individual you are speaking to asks to keep your relationship a secret. This is their way of trying to build a wedge between you and your loved ones so that they can become the one you trust and rely on. Also, if the person is promising you gifts or favors, this is a telltale sign that they are trying to make you like them and see them as a close friend and likely as someone you can possibly get romantically involved with. If they try to contact you or move you onto other sites to talk to you, predators will often do this so that they can become very involved in your life and can try to initiate deeper or more intimate conversations between you two. They do this to hopefully make it harder for parents or guardians to keep track of the conversations that are going on. This can lead to another red flag if the individual is initiating these if they are initiating these intimate discussions, especially regarding the user's appearances. So they may try to compliment you or put you on a pedestal to get you to fall for them. Another issue that was shown throughout the video game was the predator insisting on meeting face-to-face, trying to convince the user to lie to their parents so that they can pick them up in their car and bring them to their house is something predators will often do once they feel they have gained enough trust out of the user. And lastly, as we previously discussed, the mirroring language. This is another red flag because the predator will often act sympathetic, always agree with the user, and try to be their solution so that it makes the user feel like the individual who also happens to be the predator is the only one in the world who understands them.
Okay, here we are going to discuss some preventative tips and steps that parents and caregivers can take to keep children and adolescents safe while using the internet and gaming sites and even dating apps. To define active bystander, it is someone who not only witnesses a situation, but takes steps to speak up or step in to keep a situation from escalating or even preventing it in the first place. As you can see here, we have some apps that are commonly used, such as Kik, a messaging app, Bumble, which is a dating app used for dating and making connections, Twitter, and Discord, which is the platform we saw in some of the last videos. An important tip here is to remind children to interact only with people they know. It's important to reiterate people that they know in the real world and that they trust, and for them not to give out any identifying information to anybody they don't know. It's important to review which location markers are visible on your children's devices and to make sure they're turned off if possible, and to make sure what information is being given when they're using apps. You can remove any location markers that are not essential. And lastly, to engage with children about games they love and their online lives. It's important to allow them to enjoy all that is good about apps, games, and using the online platform. Having fun conversations with your children will allow them to feel comfortable talking to you about the games that they play and the interactions they have online. This may help you identify any red flags and will help make the conversation about concerns of online grooming easier to have.
So it's also very important to warn children not to accept things like gaming dollars. This is seen a lot in games like Fortnite, where you're able to purchase V-Bucks. This is something that predators can use later and use as a manipulation tactic. Another tip would be to reduce shame in conversations with children, especially if they have already shared things like child sexual abuse material. They were manipulated in order to do so, and shame is a method that traffickers use to further manipulate and be supportive. It's important to be supportive instead of blaming the child. You want to make sure you and your child know what to do if they find themselves in an exploitative situation.
And it's very incredibly important to spend device-free time with your family. This will boost serotonin levels, as well as letting children feel good without necessarily searching for validation.
So as we're leading with kindness and gratitude, the intern class of 2021 would like to thank you for joining us in our event and taking out the time to inform yourselves on human trafficking and online grooming. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.